Hello everyone, Mandy Bono here, back for you with question 9 on the immutability of God. Immutability is one of those terms that can be maybe a little confusing. Let's see if I can just adjust my light here so you guys don't need me to look good. You don't come here for the photography skills, so we won't worry about it. But yeah, immutability, don't let that be a confusing term. It just means unchangeable or immovable or, essentially, unchangeable is probably the best definition, though. St. Thomas, as you'll see, or already know if you read this section, will also refer to it as God being unmovable. So, nothing to worry about there. All right, here we are, still in the divine essence. And you'll see the immutability of God is a two-question issue. So this time we'll talk about the immutability of God properly, and then we'll talk about the eternity of God next time or the next two times. That's a 6-article question, so we'll just kind of have to see how dense it is, and I'll decide if we're going to do 2 videos or 1. But today, surprise, 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 only 2 articles, so a nice quick one for us, which is good because I'm recording this on New Year's Day and, New Year's festivities. A little tired, so I don't mind a bit of a breather here from St. Thomas. All right, so 2 articles. Whether God is altogether immutable. Whether to be immutable belongs to God alone. Let's dig into these. First up, some objections to God being immutable. Augustine says that God moves himself. And again, if something's immutable, it can't be moved even by itself. It can't be changed even by itself. So that would be a problem. Scripture says wisdom is more mobile than anything, and God is wisdom. Scripture speaks of God approaching and receding. That one's probably pretty obvious to us that, the answer is going to be that Scripture's speaking metaphorically, but again, sometimes the Summa is very complicated. Sometimes it's just about stating the obvious for the sake of stating it so that we have a complete picture. No stone left unturned by good old Saint Thomas Aquinas. All right, argument from authority, Malachi 3:6, God does not change. Pretty basic argument from Scripture. Okay, everything changeable is changeable as a result of its potential. And if you've been paying attention to the Summa, as soon as you hear that, you already know where Aquinas is going with this. Because what is God? Well, God is pure act. There is no potential in him. We have seen that time and time and time again. And therefore, because there is no potential in God, that always sounds, if you sound like an angry parent when you're saying that. You just don't have any potential. But no, we mean it in a philosophical sense. That since God has no potentiality, he is therefore not changeable. Now, movement implies composition. Here we get into a slightly different argument than what we might expect. When something changes or moves, a part of it passes away while a part of it changes. So, let me explain this. If I take a razor and shave off all my hair, I have changed. That enough is to prove I'm not immutable. Something in me has changed. So something in me is now different than it was before, but there's also a part of me that is the same. I'm still Ben Di Bono. I'm still the person that I was, even though something in me has changed. So for something to be changeable implies composition. Otherwise, if a wholly simple thing changed, it would pass completely out of existence and a new thing would come into existence with that change. Okay? So movement implies composition. Its substance remains even while its mutable portions change. Since God is wholly simple, he cannot be mutable. And then movement adds something to that which moves. God's infinity precludes anything being added to him. All right, let's dig into our objections. Augustine is speaking of movement analogically. Again, we carefully parse our terms, right? God's ability to understand and love himself is called movement, and this isn't the way that Aquinas is discussing movement. So Augustine, as we'll see when we get into Article 2, wholly agrees with Aquinas on this point, that God is immutable. He's using the term movement in an analogical sense to explain something else. And then wisdom is not movable in and of itself, but it causes change in other things. Um, very easy to understand. You gain a little bit of wisdom about finances. You stop blowing your paycheck 5 seconds after you get it and start saving money. Wisdom causes change in us, but it itself is not movable. But we speak of it as though it was. Wisdom came to me, and I realized I need to stop blowing my paycheck 5 minutes after I get it on a Friday. Right? Okay, and then reply to question 3 that, like I said, pretty obvious. The scripture, speaking of metaphors, like the verse that he cites in the objection is, draw near to God and God will draw near to you. Well, God isn't actually walking towards you. It's a metaphorical movement. So nothing too crazy or complex in that case. I'm going to try shutting this light off. See if that, no, that doesn't avert daily shit. So, all right, let's move along. Whether to be immutable belongs to God alone. Our objections. Aristotle says matter is in everything that moves. However, spiritual beings like angels lack matter and are therefore immovable. Seems like a good argument. Movement is towards an end. Things that have already reached their ultimate end, which would include those who have achieved the beatific vision, they have reached the end, which is complete satisfaction in God, and they're no longer mutable, so now they're immutable. And then the mutable is variable. The forms are invariable, therefore the forms are immutable. And if you have been tracking with some of what we've talked about with the difference between Platonism and Aristotelianism as it comes to reality and what things are, you'll know that right there we are dealing with a Platonic objection. Okay? And I'll explain that more as we get into the answers to the objections. So, argument from authority. Augustine is going to tell us that God alone is immutable. So like I said, going back to this first objection in Article 1 where, it seems like Augustine is talking about God being mutable. He doesn't disagree with Aquinas. It's just a different form. And so here Augustine not only affirms God is immutable, what we saw in Article 1, but he's affirming God is the only thing that's immutable. All right, argument. All creatures are mutable as a result of depending on God's power. This is a really fascinating one here. So make sure you get this because this is really, really good. All creatures exist because God, I should have filled that in there, God wills that they continue existing. If God did not will their preservation or the preservation of their existence, they would cease to exist, and this implies mutability in him. So, to back up to things we've talked about before, God is ultimate being, he is existence itself. And we all have our being, our ontology is derived from participation in God's existence. We saw some of this in the whole infinity of God with how is God and everything. Well, God is in everything as the cause to the effect, right? You can go review that conversation in question 7 or 8, one of those two, for more on that topic. So because all of our existence is dependent on God, we are inherently mutable as creatures because if God stopped willing our existence, we would be moved into non-existence, and that implies mutability in us. All creatures composed of matter are mutable in that their matter can be changed or be destroyed. To go back to the goofy example we had a minute ago, if I shave my head, obviously I've changed. The fact that I can do something like that automatically implies mutability. You can't have matter without mutability. And then all creatures, including spiritual creatures, are mutable insofar as they can choose. I should proofread this before I do the videos, not cheese. Choose good or evil, right? So here we get into, we had the objection about the angels up here. Well, there's still free will makes you mutable, right? And then spiritual creatures such as angels are also mutable in that they do not act in all places in the same way all the time. So to use a very simple example, in the Annunciation, Gabriel comes to Mary and tells her you're going to bear a son, Jesus. And Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, who is a spiritual being, is not mutable by any type of matter, but he is mutable in the sense that in that moment in time, he is acting in that place with that action. And at other moments in time, he isn't eternally doing the Annunciation to Mary, so he is mutable in his actions. All right. And we kind of already saw the answer to objection 1 there with that last point, really those last 2 points. But just to clear things up, because we don't, Aquinas doesn't like to disagree with his boy Aristotle. Aristotle is discussing a particular type of immutability as regarding substance and matter. And then 2, here we're talking about beings that have already achieved their end. Even such beings are immutable in regards to place. And we could also say that they are ontologically immutable as well. Even those who have achieved the beatific vision still have a participated existence. And if God willed them to stop existing or stopped willing them to exist, to put it more properly, they would stop to exist. They would cease existing. All right, and then number 3, like I said, that was an argument of Platonism. So that would be true if the forms were independent entities. Platonism says that, there's the Platonic heavenly forms, right? So there's ideal chairness, there's ideal humanness, there's ideal, everything has an ideal form that exists apart from it in the Platonic heaven. But in Aristotelianism, subjects are the forms don't actually exist apart from subjects. Subjects are given being through them. If you take a chunk of wood and carve it into a chair, you are giving that chair chairness through the conception of the form that exists in your mind, but there isn't some independent form out there of chairness. Aristotle says very clearly in the Categories that if all things cease to exist, the forms would also cease to exist. The form of humanity exists because humans exist. And if humans vanish, the form of humanity doesn't have some independent existence beyond them. At that point, the most we could say it exists is that, it exists as some memory in the mind of your dog who remembers, seeing humans. But it doesn't have any independent existence outside of that. All right, so that wraps up the brief discussion on immutability. Next time, the eternity of God, and we'll either do that in 1 or 2 videos, I don't know because I haven't gotten into the material yet, how dense it is, so we'll just see how it goes. But until next time, happy reading and happy New Year's. I'll see you later. Goodbye.